Okay, now it started the recording. We will only be recording until the discussion piece, then we will stop, just as a reminder for folks. If you have any problems with this, please feel free. You can just turn off your video. You will be able to easily communicate with us through the chat, which we are monitoring. So just a heads up again. But if you don't know me already, my name is Sophia Ross. I use they and them pronouns. I work for Capitol Hill Village, and I've been with the village for about 3 years now. Part of my major responsibilities include managing our social media, managing our website, and I also assist with our LGBT and transportation grants, which we'll be talking a bit more about momentarily. I also have with me my fantastic intern, Hannah,
Hello.
who will also be presenting today. Hannah also uses they, them pronouns. Briefly, our agenda is that we are going to do some talking at you. We'll be presenting the survey results. And then the second portion of our event is going to be a majority focused on getting your thoughts about the data and talking about the next steps for our project. So we will be spending about probably the next 30 minutes or so just going over, sorry, Kevin. Does anyone else have any trouble hearing us? Because Kevin is having trouble. Feel free to respond in the chat. But yes, so we'll be just taking the first portion of our event to discuss the results, which will be beginning shortly. And due to the need to get through our results, it would be great if we waited until the discussion portion, so we just have enough time to present all of the results before we hear from you all. But again, please feel free to use the chat. Okay. So for anyone who is on the call today and has never been to a CHV event before, who has never heard of our organization, I just wanted to take a moment to give kind of like a very, very brief Villages 101. Villages 101, here we go. Capitol Hill Village was established in 2007. We are the second village in the United States. There are about 13 villages in DC. We are the largest of said 13 villages. And it's important to note that villages are not brick and mortar buildings, but are communities of people congregated in a specific geographic boundary. So we're not a physical complex, even though we do happen to have an office, but it is about folks living in the community, in their homes, organizing around each other. So, and part of this core aspect of a village is having community volunteers, which sometimes are also members, that help support members that are aging in place. And it's also important to mention that we don't have a specific age restriction or any requirement when it comes to, oh, hold on a moment here. I'm just gonna mute someone really quickly. So, apologies, I'm just getting back to where I was. So, okay, apologies, I got a little bit off track there. Yeah, we don't have an age restriction, and that's important to note because some folks might think that there's a certain age requirement you have to meet to be part of a village, but you could join a village no matter what age you are. So, and for some statistics, which we'll be talking about a lot about today, at the last time we did our big village-wide survey, we have around 400 village members and over 100 active volunteers. And I can add to this, I think currently the number that I had was around 10% of our village membership, or maybe a little bit less, identify as LGBT. So for added fun statistics. So, and now I wanted to talk a little bit for context. Again, if this is the first time you've heard about the project that we're doing and the survey, I wanted to give some background to why we are doing this. So as I mentioned before, my role specifically has to do with our LGBTQ grant, which is funded by the DC Department of Aging and Community Living. So as part of our general programming and services, we have the opportunity to specifically focus on the LGBT community in DC, older adult community, through things like one-time programming. We have different ongoing events like our regular social hours. We have a support group that's been going on for over a year focused on brain health, as well as our inclusion work. So this project that we are currently working on is just a piece of this work. So I had wanted to mention, we'll be using the word continuing care retirement community, also known as CCRC, a lot today. So just getting it out there, I want to give a standard definition for what that means. So continuing care retirement communities have been defined by AARP as a long-term care option for older folks who want to stay in the same place through different phases of the aging process. So it's a centralization of services and care. For instance, some continuing care communities will have an independent living area. They will have an assisting living. They will have a specific memory care unit, all on one campus. You don't have to go anywhere. It is all in one centralized location, which you are paying into said options for services. So, and not to go too deep into what CCRCs are, but so why did we start this project? So over the last few years since I started at the Village, I've had the chance to talk with a lot of community members, and one thing that has come up was a concern about, well, you know, I really enjoy where I'm living now, but what will happen to me in the future? What if I plan to or have to move out of my home to get care? I don't know if it'll be safe. I'm just really uncertain, and there's just been a lot of concerns about that. So that was part of the motivation, was to try to answer those questions. And I just kind of summarized here that the goal of this project is to provide more insight into the inclusivity and experiences of LGBT+ residents in long-term care communities, of which CCRCs are one of a type of long-term care community, specifically in the DC area. So we'll be going into the details in a moment about our survey, but just to a little addendum here is that the CCRC survey is just the first step in this process, because we wanted to get the actual input and experiences of actual DC older adult LGBT residents before we started doing anything with the project. So, and also another note here for folks who might be interested is that, well, why did we choose a CCRC? There's other types of long-term care communities. What was the motivation behind that? And part of that is because we haven't done a major project like this before, in which we'll be interfacing with these care communities. And so we've already had some pretty good existing relationships with specific CCRCs, but just in general, CCRCs are a pre-existing relationship that our Village had. And so we wanted to ensure that doing this for the first time, we would yield some sort of resources and products. But also there's the thought that by successfully working with CCRCs, this could be a great way to show other types of care communities that this kind of work is possible, and also just to show the benefits and just the purpose for if we wanted to expand this project in the future to include other care communities. Okay. So diving into what the details about the survey. So we conducted this survey last February. It only ran for about 3 weeks from the 1st to the 22nd. Our focus was to survey LGBT plus residents of DC that were 50 years and older. And our goal was to learn more about their experiences related to aging, as well as if they plan to move into a CCRC in the future or not, and also very specific questions related to that, which we will get into in a moment. And it's also important to mention that there was some incentive to taking our survey. 2 lucky respondents received a gift card through our gift card raffle. So next, I'm going to turn things over to Hannah to talk more about, start diving into our data.
Yeah, so I'm going to discuss some of the demographics of the 48 respondents to our survey, which is pretty awesome that we got 48 respondents. So first, as you can see, gay men made up the majority of the respondents. More than half of the respondents were in their 60s. Most respondents have lived in DC for 40 years or more, with the second highest category being 30 to 40 years. More than half of the respondents were single or widowed, but many others were married or partnered, with around 6% dating. So now I'm going to jump into some question responses specifically in the survey. We found that 22% of respondents were optimistic that problems faced by LGBT plus older adults will be resolved in the next 10 years. So that's a pretty low number. Obviously, our goal is for this to be a lot higher, as like internal optimism is important to health and wellness. And this lack of optimism also reflects the current state of LGBT plus older adult experiences. We're not quite sure if people were responding to their own experiences in DC or the general state of the US or the world. But regardless, this definitely lets us know that we have a lot to do. We need to continue to focus on improving support for LGBT plus older adults to combat those intersections of homophobia, transphobia, and ageism. Next, we also asked people about their top fears and concerns around aging. So as you can see, their #1 fear was physical health challenges and decline. Then we had lack of family and friends, the cost of aging, access to healthcare, and the inability to self-advocate. An important note here is that those top fears and concerns also aligned with what respondents considered most important to them in the future, like spending time with family and friends, maintaining their health, and healthcare access. All right, so next, we'll be moving into questions specifically around continuing care retirement communities. As you can see, 23% of people said that they planned to move into a CCRC, and 23% of people said that they did not plan to. But we had this huge chunk of 54% of people saying that they were unsure about their plans. So this definitely supports the importance of providing more CCRC resources and information, especially for LGBTQ plus folks. So of the 23% who said that they did not plan to move into a CCRC, most people said that they did not plan to move at all, wanted to live in an independent residence, like a condo, apartment, or single family home, or they planned to move into a retirement community. So you can see this in the top alternatives to a CCRC. Also, of those who planned to move to a CCRC or were unsure, most wanted to stay in DC. You can see that 86% number there. So that definitely supports our efforts in reaching out to DC CCRCs in the future. Another important consideration here is that people also indicated that their plans were really dependent on their health and their finances. All right, so the next questions, we only asked these to people who responded yes or unsure into their plans in moving into a CCRC. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we go forward. All right, so we asked respondents about their top barriers for moving into a CCRC. Fear of discrimination from staff and lack of explicit commitment to LGBT plus inclusion were both top barriers for moving into a CCRC. So this heavily supports actions within CCRCs to implement LGBT plus training and outreach, as well as development of LGBT plus specific resources for people who are researching CCRCs. All right, next. We also asked respondents about their top incentives for moving into a CCRC. Knowing providers or staff are trained for LGBT plus residents' needs and having LGBT plus affinity groups or DEI communities were among the top incentives for moving into a CCRC. So this again reinforces what we learned from the fears as well. There needs to be some actions both within CCRCs and outreach for LGBT people. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Sophia.
Okay. So the next 3 slides that I'm going to be talking about are going to specifically focus on respondents' views as it relates to LGBT plus inclusion in continuing care retirement communities. The first statistics or result that I wanted to highlight was that when asked, 31% of respondents noted that they were not confident they would be treated fairly as an LGBT plus person if they moved into a CCRC in the DMV tomorrow. So that result highlighted a few things. So the first thing is that ideally we want that number to be 0. You want that confidence rate to be really high, and you really want to know that CCRCs are doing all that they can and are showing that they're doing as much as they can to be inclusive of and welcoming of LGBT folks. So part of this just validated that even here in the DMV area, there's still a lot of work that CCRCs need to be doing in terms of engagement and outreach and just highlighting policies they have. There is work to be done for CCRCs. And also it kind of just validated the importance of doing our project and why we should even take the time and energy to try to work with CCRCs to put out these resources. Next. So the next result that we wanted to highlight was what respondents had to say for their top criteria for determining if a CCRC is inclusive or affirming. And we just highlighted the top 3 criteria here. And for the number 1 top criteria, we had hearing from current LGBT plus residents about their experiences and opinions. So getting that person to person kind of just lived experiences and actually hearing from real residents was really important. Second for criteria, we had internal expressions of LGBT plus inclusion. So specifically what this might look like, respondents said this could be knowing about a CCRC's policies as it relates to LGBT residents and just safety and anti-discrimination, knowing if a CCRC is responsive to residents' concerns and if they're open to discussing complaints, and if staff are responsibly supervised. So that's all in the category of internal expressions of inclusion. And lastly, for top criteria, we had if a CCRC offers LGBT plus events or groups. So this highlights what folks actually think is important. I think this information is really important also for CCRCs to hear from prospective community members, potential future residents. And I feel like this is not acknowledged enough. So, and also, again, this information, as we'll be talking about in a moment, is really valuable when we're thinking about how we might want to go about producing resources, and what resources might be most beneficial to community members. Okay. So the next thing I want to highlight was what respondents had to say regarding what they want CCRC staff to know about their needs as LGBT individuals. And we, again, just highlighted the top 3 of responses. The first top response was to be treated fairly, respectfully, and with dignity like other residents. The second was to be aware of and interested in my needs as an individual. And lastly, CCRC staff should affirm my relationships. So again, all of this data, this information was really telling in terms of why it's important for CCRCs just to take the time and the effort to engage in LGBT inclusion work. But also it just emphasizes why we need to humanize LGBT inclusion work, and not just us, but CCRCs need to see actual future LGBT residents as people, and not just as statistics to add to their outreach information or to put up on their website. These are actual residents that have different needs and wants and considerations. So next, so last but not least, in terms of our survey results, and then we are going to get to dive into our discussion, and I will be pausing the recording momentarily once we're done. But we wanted to highlight the last question on our survey, in which we asked respondents if they were aware of DC Law 23-154. DC Law 23-154 is formally known as the Care for LGBTQ Seniors and Seniors with HIV Amendment Act of 2020. It's a very long title. And so it was passed in 2020 and established a LGBTQ and HIV long-term care Bill of Rights, providing specific rights and legal protections for LGBT plus residents and residents with HIV in any long-term care community, which includes continuing care retirement communities. And 81% of our respondents said that they were not aware that this law existed. So that is a very high number. And I think it just signified that the importance of increased awareness about policies, and just the fact that DC is unique and is one of DC and 2 other states. Actually, it might be DC and 3 other states right now. I can't remember off the top of my head, have this law, specifically a LGBT Bill of Rights. So it's just very important to know what your rights are. But also, in addition, this is a very unique bill because unlike a lot of care facilities' current Bill of Rights, it includes specific stipulations that relate to someone's gender identity and affirming their autonomy as someone who is gender diverse or who might be transgender. So that is extremely important, and it's great to have that as a law here in DC. But this response is also really important because a lot of the folks, going back to a previous slide about where folks might, if they had to go to a care community, might move, is DC was the top choice, but Virginia and Maryland were also still on that list. And both of those states do not have a LGBT Bill of Rights on the books. Hopefully in the future they will, but as it currently stands, that is not something that exists. So just increasing awareness about the legislation that does exist. I also realized I forgot to mention what's not on here is that another great thing about this law is that it also requires that the staff members of a long-term care facility have to be trained every 2 years. And I'm not going to get into the details as to like how long that training is and the stipulations, because that's another discussion, but they have to have some sort of training every 2 years. That's anti-discrimination related training. So okay, hold on one moment. I'm pausing our recording.